Hello and welcome. My name is Maria and this is my Visible Knowledge Project for Intro to Chicanx Latinx Histories at the Claremont Colleges, titled Cross the Ocean and Nothing Changed, The Journey of Marielitos. We will explore an accidental cooperation between Cuban and American governments in shaping hostile attitudes toward Mariel migrants. I will take you through the path the Mariel Boatlift migrants took to get out of Cuba and into the United States. The Mariel Boatlift of an estimated 124,779 Cubans from the port of Mariel between April to September 1980 marked a different stage of Cuban migration to the United States. You see, it was not the magnitude of Cubans that arrived on the shores of Florida that symbolized the new era. It was a morally undesirable depiction of Mariel migrants, or Marielitos, that distinguished their journey as different. If Marielitos were fleeing from the same nation as their relatives, what changed that resulted in the new perception? To answer this question, I will take you back to Cuba. The Mariel Boatlift began on April 1980 with the Peruvian embassy crisis in Havana, Cuba. In early April, an estimated 11,000 Cubans sought refuge and the possibility of escaping communism with political asylum in the Peruvian embassy. Historian Julio Capo Jr. calls the crisis of, quote, great humiliation for Fidel Castro's regime, end quote. Castro's recovery from the embarrassment was a direct moral attack on the migrants. He evoked national pride messages that the Marielitos were staining the revolutionary cause. Castro's rhetorical strategy is especially present in his May 1, 1980 speech in Havana's José Martí Revolution Square, where he congratulates the U.S. for, quote, doing an excellent sanitation job. End quote. Castro signals that the U.S.'s taking of Marielitos was a cleaning job of the people that challenged the Cuban Revolution, or La Escoria. Castro's strategy of hiding his political motives as a moral campaign does not stop there. A requirement to travel out of Mariel was to prove their moral incorrectness with government certification. This would provide evidence to deceive the Cuban and the American people that everyone who was traveling out of Port of Mariel did not meet moral standards. Cubans desperate to flee had to adopt the title of immoral, often falsifying records to achieve this status. This requirement pushed all of Marielitos under one label, morally undesirable. When the port of Mariel opened on April 20, 1980, the ultimate test of Castro's moral deviancy campaign was launched, whether the label and rejection of Marielitos was going to travel with them across the ocean and into the United States. Now, 90 miles off the coast of Cuba is the U.S. mainland, where President Jimmy Carter expressed that he welcomes Mariel Boatlift migrants with, quote, an open heart and open arms, end quote. However, the statement proved to be extremely ironic and false based on recently changed U.S. laws that influenced negative attitudes toward Marielitos. A month before the opening of the Port of Mariel, the Refugee Act of 1980 was signed into law by President Carter on March 17, 1980. The law changed the definition of refugee to now be, quote, an individual fleeing persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion, end quote. Not only did it disqualify Marielitos from easily achieving refugee status, but it put Mariel migrants in a gray space in terms of their status in America. The federal response on June 20, 1980, by the Office of the U.S. Attorney did not do much to solve this issue of the lack of a term for Marielitos. While they could not be refugees, the administration adopted a temporary migratory title, the Cuban Haitian entrant. The US government put a band-aid on a broken leg, essentially, because the empty title did not define the Marielitos' place in the United States immigration system. The entrant label did not define who was responsible for providing economic aid to the migrants. Economic responsibilities kept getting thrown around from federal agencies to sparse congressional acts. Without the economic certainty attached to the refugee status, aid for Marielitos in Florida eventually fell onto the laps of local and state governments. Funding became unstable and scarce, then causing a series of cascading economic and social effects on local governments. In his open letter to President Carter, William Layman, a congressman for the 13th District of Florida, passionately expresses the implications that Mariel entrants have created in South Florida. Congressman Layman pushes the narrative of a South Florida that is experiencing the effects of the spike in Cuban migration as a result of the Mariel Boatlift and is in subsequent, quote, misery, end quote. Layman paints a graphic image of a barely surviving South Florida and points a finger to the economic nuisance that the Marielito has become. Here, Congressman Layman exposes the perception of the Marielito to be an immense burden to South Florida. Their presence is seen as taking local funds and therefore brings South Florida into extreme debt. Congressman Layman extends Fidel Castro's portrayal of Marielitos as morally undesirable into an economic realm, because their place in South Florida has initiated an economic crisis that paved the way for South Florida to be a place of, quote, fear, bloodshed, and human misery, end quote. Congressman Layman mirrors the public's rejection of Marielitos because of the tax annoyances and their inability to assimilate. To them, Marielitos stuck out like a sore thumb. Instead of alleviating the tense and hostile social environment or working to invite Mariel migrants into society, the American government and public continued treating and viewing Marielitos as outsiders. The negative attitudes toward Marielitos in America had little to do with their individual actions. They were a result of weak governmental organization and policies that led to a lot of economic downfalls in supporting Marielitos, plus amplified Cuban images of moral undesirability. Now, looking at the map 40 years since the Mariel Boatlift, combined with similarities in attitudes initiated by the American and Cuban government and adopted by the public, it is clear that there are no noticeable differences in how Marielitos were treated and viewed in both countries. While they are two opposite governments, Cuba and the United States jointly collaborated in creating governmental difficulties for Marielitos, ultimately treating them as moral outsiders in both countries. Even in the country that delivered the American dream to their relatives, Marielitos were denied the means to build the ideal they searched for since leaving Cuba. The Mariel migration adds a new meaning to Cuban migration, one of struggle and exclusion. The illusion of the American dream would never be the same for Cubans. Thank you.